I've always known that my brother Marcus was the favorite, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my 28th birthday last month. Growing up in our suburban Denver home, the pattern was always the same. Marcus got the bigger room, the newer clothes, and most importantly, all of Mom's attention. Dad tried to balance things out when he was around, but his job as a long-haul trucker kept him away for weeks at a time. I learned early that complaining about the unfairness only made things worse, so I buried my feelings deep and focused on becoming independent. The resentment had been building for years, like pressure in a volcano waiting to explode. The morning of October 15th started like any other Saturday in our neighborhood of Lakewood. The autumn air was crisp, and the maple trees lining our street had turned brilliant shades of orange and red. I'd taken the day off from my job at the marketing firm downtown, hoping to spend some quality time with family. Mom had promised to make my favorite chocolate chip pancakes, and for once, I allowed myself to believe this birthday might be different. Maybe this year, I'd finally feel like I mattered as much as Marcus did. I walked downstairs to find Mom, bustling around the kitchen, flour dusting her navy blue apron. The familiar scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, and I could hear the sizzle of bacon in the cast-iron skillet Dad had bought her years ago. "Morning, sweetheart," she called without turning around, her graying hair pulled back in the same messy bun she'd worn since I was a child. For a moment, everything felt normal, and I let myself relax into the warmth of what seemed like a perfect birthday morning. The kitchen felt like a sanctuary, filled with the promise of celebration. Marcus bounded down the stairs at 9 a.m. sharp, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway as he stretched dramatically. At 26, he still lived at home, bouncing between part-time jobs and what Mom called his artistic pursuits, which mostly meant playing guitar in a band that performed at local coffee shops. "Smells amazing in here, Mom," he said, planting a kiss on her cheek before stealing a piece of bacon from the plate. She giggled like a schoolgirl, swatting playfully at his hand while her eyes sparkled with the kind of joy I rarely inspired. In her. The interaction was so natural, so effortless, that it made my chest ache with longing. The dynamic was painfully familiar, but I pushed down the familiar sting of resentment. Today was my birthday, I reminded myself, and I was determined to enjoy it. I poured myself coffee from the pot Mom had brewed extra strong, just the way I liked it, and settled into my usual spot at the kitchen table. The morning sun streamed through the gingham curtains, casting everything in a golden glow that made me hopeful. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year, I'd finally get the attention I'd been craving my entire life. Marcus dominated the breakfast conversation, as usual, regaling us with stories about his band's latest gig at a dive bar in downtown Denver. Mom hung on his every word, asking follow-up questions and laughing at his jokes with genuine delight. When I tried to share news about my recent promotion at work, the conversation somehow circled back to Marcus within minutes. I watched from across the table, feeling like a spectator in my own family's life. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me that even on my birthday, I was still invisible. After breakfast, I helped Mom clear the dishes while Marcus disappeared upstairs to shower. She hummed softly as she worked, a tune I recognized from an old song she used to sing when we were children. "You seem happy today," I observed, hoping to connect with her in this quiet moment. She smiled at me, and for a brief second, I saw something that looked like maternal affection in her eyes. "It's your special day," she said simply, but those words filled me with more warmth than I'd felt in years. The house felt different that morning, charged with anticipation and possibility. I found myself moving through familiar spaces with renewed appreciation, noticing details I'd overlooked before. The family photos lining the hallway told the story of our lives: school pictures, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings. I paused at one from my college graduation, where Mom's smile looked forced compared to the radiant joy on her face in Marcus's high school graduation photo beside it. Even in still images, the favoritism was evident, but I tried to push those thoughts away. I spent the afternoon helping Mom prepare for the small gathering she'd planned for that evening. We arranged flowers from her garden in crystal vases, set out her good china, and prepared appetizers together in comfortable silence. Working alongside her felt like a glimpse into the relationship I'd always wanted us to have. Easy, collaborative, filled with mutual respect. She seemed genuinely excited about the evening ahead, and her enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things between us could change. As the day progressed, I caught myself watching Mom carefully, looking for signs of the favoritism that had defined our relationship for so long. But she seemed different today, more attentive to me, more present in our interactions. When she complimented my outfit or asked about my work, it felt genuine rather than perfunctory. I began to wonder if maybe she'd finally realized how unfairly she'd been treating me all these years. The hope that bloomed in my chest was both beautiful and terrifying, because hoping meant risking disappointment once again. After lunch, Mom announced she had something special planned for my birthday celebration. Her eyes held a mischievous twinkle as she wiped her hands on her apron and glanced between Marcus and me. "I've been working on something for weeks," she said, her voice filled with excitement that I hadn't heard directed at me in years. The way she looked at me made my heart skip with anticipation, and I found myself sitting up straighter, hungry for whatever surprise she had in store. This felt like the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life. "What kind of surprise?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual while my pulse quickened. Mom had never been one for elaborate gestures when it came to my birthdays. Usually it was a store-bought cake and a card with $20 tucked inside. Marcus, on the other hand, had received handmade quilts, surprise parties, and once, a trip to see his favorite band in Chicago. The fact that she'd been working on something for weeks felt like a miracle, and I allowed myself to dream about what it might be. Maybe a piece of jewelry or something for my new apartment, or even just a heartfelt letter acknowledging my achievements. "You'll have to wait until tonight," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "I've invited the Hendersons from next door, and your Aunt Linda is driving up from Colorado Springs." The mention of Aunt Linda surprised me. She was Dad's sister, and had always been more supportive of my achievements than Mom ever was. Having her there felt like validation that this birthday might actually be about me for once. I couldn't remember the last time Mom had put this much effort into planning something specifically for me. The guest list alone suggested that she wanted to celebrate me properly, with people who genuinely cared about my happiness. Marcus leaned back in his chair, balancing it on two legs the way Mom usually scolded him for. "Sounds fancy," he said, though I caught something in his tone that I couldn't quite identify. "What's the occasion?" The question struck me as odd. It was my birthday, after all. But Mom just laughed and ruffled his dark hair. "Your sister deserves something special," she said, and those words hit me like a warm wave. For the first time in years, I felt seen and valued by the woman who had brought me into this world. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of anticipation and nervous energy. I found myself cleaning my room and choosing my outfit with unusual care, wanting to look perfect for whatever Mom had planned. The navy blue dress I'd bought for work presentations seemed appropriate, and I even curled my hair the way I'd seen in the beauty magazines. As I applied my makeup in the bathroom mirror, I caught myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. Tonight was going to be my night, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it. I called my best friend Sarah from college to share my excitement, something I rarely did when it came to family events. "Mom's actually planned something special. For my birthday," I told her, unable to keep the wonder out of my voice. Sarah knew about my complicated relationship with my family, how I'd always felt like an outsider in my own home. "That's amazing," she said, and I could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. You deserve to be celebrated." Her words reminded me that I did deserve this, that wanting my mother's attention and approval wasn't asking too much. As evening approached, I found myself getting more and more nervous. The anticipation was almost overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a cliff and preparing to jump. I'd spent so many years accepting that I would always be second best in my mother's eyes, that the possibility of being truly seen and celebrated felt almost too good to be true. What if the surprise wasn't as special as I was building it up to be? What if I was setting myself up for disappointment once again? But I pushed those doubts away, determined to enjoy this moment of feeling valued. Mom disappeared into her bedroom around 5 o'clock, emerging with a secretive smile and instructions for me to stay in the living room. I could hear her moving around upstairs, and the sound of rustling paper suggested she was wrapping something. Marcus had been unusually quiet all afternoon, which I attributed to him finally recognizing that this was my time to shine. For once, he wasn't the center of attention, and I was surprised by how natural it felt. Maybe this was how normal families operated, taking turns celebrating each other's milestones. The house felt charged with possibility as I waited for the guests to arrive. I'd set out photo albums on the coffee table, hoping to share some memories with Aunt Linda and catch up on her life. The living room looked perfect, with Mom's good candles lit and fresh flowers on every surface. Everything felt elevated and special, like we were preparing for something truly significant. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until my celebration would begin. This was it. This was finally going to be my moment. Standing in front of the hallway mirror, I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing heart. I looked good, I felt ready, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about a family gathering. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked confident and deserving of celebration. Whatever Mom had planned, I was ready to receive it with grace and gratitude. This birthday was going to mark a turning point in our relationship. I was sure of it. By 3 in the afternoon, I was practically vibrating with excitement and nerves. I'd helped Mom prepare her famous 7-layer dip and arrange flowers from her garden in the crystal vase that only came out for special occasions. The house smelled like the vanilla candles she'd lit throughout the living room, and she'd even pulled out the good china, the set with the delicate blue roses that had belonged to her mother. Everything felt elevated and special, like I was finally getting the kind of celebration I'd watched her throw for Marcus countless times over the years. The attention to detail was overwhelming in the best possible way. Aunt Linda arrived first, pulling into our driveway in her red Honda Civic with a smile that could light up a room. She wrapped me in one of her signature bear hugs, the kind that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with emotion. 28 looks good on you." She handed me a beautifully wrapped box that rattled intriguingly when I shook it, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement that came with the promise of a thoughtful gift. Having her there made the evening feel more legitimate, more real. "I can't believe you drove all the way up here," I said, still holding her tight. Colorado Springs was a 2-hour drive in good weather, and the early October roads could be unpredictable. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, stepping back to look at me with those kind eyes that reminded me so much of Dad. "Besides, it's been too long since we've had a proper visit." She glanced around the living room, taking in all the special touches Mom had added for the evening. "Your mother really went all out," she observed, and I felt a surge of pride at the recognition. The Hendersons arrived shortly after, bringing their famous potato salad and warm wishes for my special day. Mrs. Henderson had known me since I was 5 years old, and she made a point of telling me how proud she was of my recent promotion at work. Her husband, Bob, clapped me on the shoulder and asked about my plans for the future, engaging with me in the kind of meaningful conversation that Mom rarely initiated. For a moment, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely interested in my life, I felt like the center of attention in the best possible way. This was how it should feel to be celebrated. Mom fluttered around the room like a social butterfly, making sure everyone had drinks and appetizers. She kept catching my eye and smiling, sharing little conspiratorial looks that made me feel like we were co-conspirators in creating the perfect evening. "Isn't she wonderful?" she said to Mrs. Henderson, gesturing toward me with obvious pride. She just got promoted to senior account manager at her firm. Hearing her brag about my accomplishments to the neighbors felt surreal. When was the last time she'd acknowledged my professional success? I found myself standing a little taller, basking in this unfamiliar maternal approval. Marcus appeared just as we were settling into the living room, fresh from a shower and wearing the button-down shirt Mom had bought him last month. He moved through the room with his usual easy charm, making jokes and engaging everyone in conversation while I watched from the couch. I noticed how naturally he drew people's attention, how effortlessly he became the focal point of any gathering. Part of me felt the familiar pang of jealousy, but I pushed it aside. Tonight was supposed to be about me, and I was determined not to let old resentments ruin it. For once, I was going to be gracious about sharing the spotlight. "So, Marcus, how's the music career going?" Bob Henderson asked, settling into Dad's old recliner with a beer. Marcus launched into his usual spiel about the band's latest projects, his eyes lighting up as he described their sound and their dreams of making it big. I found myself listening with genuine interest rather than the usual mixture of envy and annoyance. Maybe it was the birthday magic, or maybe I was finally mature enough to be happy for his passion without feeling threatened by Mom's support of it. Tonight, there was room for both of us to shine. The conversation flowed easily around the room, with everyone contributing stories and laughter. Aunt Linda regaled us with tales from her job at the elementary school where she taught fourth grade. The Hendersons shared updates about their grown children and their new grandchild. Even I found myself opening up, sharing funny stories from work and talking about my goals for the future. It felt natural and comfortable, like we were all equals in this gathering rather than me being the forgotten child fighting for scraps of attention. This was what family gatherings should feel like. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing into the warmth of the gathering. Mom bustled around, making sure everyone had drinks and snacks, occasionally catching my eye and winking conspiratorially. The anticipation was almost unbearable, but in the best possible way. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until whatever surprise she'd planned would be revealed. The house felt alive with celebration, and for the first time in years, I was the reason for it all. This was my night, my moment, my time to be the beloved daughter I'd always wanted to be. Looking around the room at these people who had gathered to celebrate me, I felt a warmth in my chest that I'd almost forgotten existed. This was what love looked like. People taking time out of their busy lives to acknowledge your existence, to celebrate your milestones, to make you feel valued and important. Mom had created this for me, had gathered these people in my honor, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Whatever surprise she had planned was almost secondary to this feeling of being truly seen and celebrated by the people who mattered most. At 6 o'clock sharp, Mom announced it was time for the surprise. My heart hammered against my ribs as she disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a large rectangular package wrapped in silver paper and tied with an elaborate purple bow. The size of it took my breath away. It was clearly something significant, something that had required real thought and planning. Everyone gathered around the living room, their faces bright with anticipation, and I felt like the star of my own show for the first time in my adult life. The moment felt sacred, like everything in my life had been building up to this point. "Before you open it," Mom said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I want you to know how much thought went into this." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of our family and friends, all focused on me with warm smiles. I spent weeks researching and planning, calling different places, making sure everything was perfect. The buildup was almost overwhelming, and I found myself fighting back tears of gratitude. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life, when my mother would finally show me I was worth the same effort she'd always given Marcus. The weight of her words settled over me like a blessing. With shaking hands, I carefully peeled away the silver wrapping paper, trying to preserve the beautiful bow that had clearly taken time to perfect. The paper was expensive, the kind that didn't tear easily, and I could tell she'd wrapped it herself rather than having it done at the store. Underneath was a plain white box, and I lifted the lid with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was the most beautiful leather portfolio I'd ever seen. Rich chocolate brown with my initials embossed in gold lettering. It was professional, elegant, and exactly the kind of thing I'd admired. In-store windows, but never bought for myself. "It's for your business presentations," Mom explained, her voice filled with pride. "I know how important your career is to you, and I wanted you to have something that would help you feel confident and professional." I ran my fingers over the smooth leather, marveling at the quality and craftsmanship. Inside were sections for documents, business cards, and even a small notepad with my name printed at the top. It was practical and beautiful, clearly expensive, and most importantly, it showed that Mom had been paying attention to my life and ambitions. She knew what I did for a living, she understood what would be meaningful to me, and she'd invested time and money in something that would actually enhance my career. The room erupted in appreciation as I held up the portfolio, everyone commenting on how thoughtful and perfect it was. Aunt Linda squeezed my shoulder, whispering how proud she was of both my accomplishments and Mom's recognition of them. Mrs. Henderson admired the craftsmanship, while her husband noted how professional it would make me look in client meetings. For a moment, I felt completely overwhelmed by the love and attention surrounding me. This was what I'd been missing all these years, the feeling of being truly seen and celebrated by the people who mattered most. The portfolio was beautiful, but the thought behind it was priceless. "Mom, this is incredible," I managed to say through the tears that were threatening to spill over. "I can't believe you did this for me." The leather felt warm in my hands, and I could imagine carrying it into important meetings, feeling confident and prepared. It was exactly what I needed at this stage in my career, and the fact that she'd recognized that meant everything to me. "I noticed you using that old folder for your presentations," she said with a smile. "You deserve something that reflects how successful you've become." Her words hit me like a physical embrace, and I realized this was the first time she'd ever acknowledged my professional achievements with such genuine pride. I stood up to hug her, the portfolio clutched against my chest like a treasure. "Thank you," I whispered into her ear, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. She held me tight, and for a moment, I felt like her little girl again, not the overlooked daughter, but the beloved child I'd always wanted to be. "You deserve this and so much more," she whispered back, and I felt something inside me heal. This was the mother I'd always hoped she could be, the one who saw my worth and wanted to celebrate it. The gift wasn't just a portfolio, it was validation, recognition, and love all wrapped up in beautiful leather. Marcus had been unusually quiet during the gift opening, but I attributed it to him being gracious enough to let me have my moment. When I looked over at him, he was staring at the portfolio with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's really nice, sis," he said. But something in his tone made me pause. There was a flatness to his voice that didn't match the enthusiasm of everyone else in the room. I pushed the observation aside, determined not to let anything dampen this perfect moment. This was my time to shine, and I wasn't going to let paranoia or old insecurities ruin it. The portfolio represented everything I'd ever wanted from my mother: recognition of my hard work, investment in my future, and most importantly, proof that she saw me as worthy of her time and attention. As I examined every detail, from the gold lettering to the pristine interior organization, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a gift. It was an apology for years of feeling invisible, a promise that things would be different going forward. I traced my initials with my finger, marveling at how official and important they looked embossed in gold. This was mine, created specifically for me, and nothing could change that. Sitting back down on the couch with the portfolio in my lap, I felt a peace settle over me that I'd never experienced in this house before. The conversations resumed around me, but I was lost in my own world of gratitude and wonder. Mom kept glancing over at me with a satisfied smile, clearly pleased with my reaction to her gift. This was how birthdays should feel, I realized, surrounded by love, recognized for who you are, and celebrated for your achievements. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly valued by my own family. I was still admiring the portfolio, running my fingers over the embossed initials, when I noticed the room had gone quiet. Looking up, I saw Mom and Marcus exchanging a look that made my stomach drop without me understanding why. There was something in their silent communication that felt familiar and exclusionary, like a secret language they shared that I'd never been privy to. The warmth that had been building in my chest all evening suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble about to burst. I clutched the portfolio tighter, as if holding onto it could preserve this perfect moment. "Actually," Mom said, her voice taking on a different tone that I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she was about to disappoint me. "I need to talk to you about something." The room fell silent, and I felt the temperature drop several degrees despite the warmth from the fireplace. Aunt Linda's smile faltered, and the Hendersons exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus was staring at his hands, his jaw clenched in a way that suggested he knew what was coming. My heart started racing, but not with excitement this time. With a growing sense of dread that I couldn't shake. "What is it?" I asked, though every instinct I had was screaming that I didn't want to hear what came next. The portfolio suddenly felt heavier in my hands, and I had the irrational urge to run upstairs and hide it somewhere safe. Mom looked around the room nervously, then back at Marcus, who still wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, and I could feel the eyes of our guests shifting between us, sensing the sudden tension that had descended over what had been a perfect celebration. The air felt thick with unspoken words and impending disaster. "The thing is," Mom began, wringing her hands in that way she did when she was anxious, "Marcus has a really important opportunity coming up." I felt my heart start to race, but not with excitement this time, with a growing sense of dread. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room, and I watched as understanding dawned on Aunt Linda's face, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "His band has been offered a chance to record a demo with a real producer, but they need professional materials to present to the record label." The words were coming out in a rush now, as if she was trying to get them out before she lost her nerve. "What does that have to do with my birthday gift?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand with crystal clarity what was happening. The portfolio was still in my hands, but it suddenly felt like it was made of lead instead of leather. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, small and distant like it was coming from underwater. Marcus finally looked up, and I saw guilt written across his features, mixed with something that looked almost like entitlement. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds until my world imploded. "Well," Mom said, taking a deep breath that seemed to require all her courage, "I think Marcus deserves this more than you do right now." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I actually gasped out loud. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding the room in silence, and I heard Mrs. Henderson make a small noise of shock. "He's at such a crucial point in his career, and this portfolio would be perfect for his meeting with the record executives next week." She reached for the portfolio, but I pulled it back instinctively, my grip tightening on the leather handles. "This couldn't be happening." Not on my birthday, not in front of everyone, not after she'd made such a show of how much thought she'd put into it for me. The room erupted in uncomfortable tension, with Aunt Linda pushing back from the table and the Hendersons looking like they wanted to disappear into the furniture. "Sarah, you cannot be serious," Aunt Linda said, her voice sharp with disbelief. But Mom's expression was resolute, her jaw set in that stubborn line I knew meant she'd made up her mind. "Sometimes being a good mother means making difficult decisions," she said, as if that explanation made any sense at all. I stared at her, wondering how she could possibly believe that humiliating me in front of our guests and stealing my birthday gift could be construed as good parenting. "This is my birthday," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my gift. You had my initials put on it." I held up the portfolio so she could see the gold lettering that spelled out my name, hoping the visual reminder would snap her back to reality. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. She was literally trying to take back a personalized gift on my birthday because she'd decided my brother needed it more. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, and I felt something inside me crack that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Marcus finally spoke up, but not to defend me or refuse the gift. "Come on, sis," he said with that easy smile that usually charmed everyone around him. "It's not that big a deal. I'll pay you back for it once the record deal comes through." The casual dismissal of my feelings, the assumption that I should just go along with this insanity, made me see red. He was actually going to take my birthday gift and act like I was being unreasonable for objecting. The entitlement was staggering, and I realized that he'd probably been in on this plan all along. Looking around the room at the faces of our guests, I saw my own shock and disbelief reflected back at me. This wasn't normal family behavior. This was wrong, and everyone could see it except for the two people who were supposed to love me most. The portfolio in my hands had transformed from a symbol of love and recognition into evidence of just how little I meant to my own mother. She'd given me the gift, let me believe I was finally valued, and was now taking it away as if my feelings didn't matter at all. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I could barely breathe. The room remained frozen in uncomfortable silence as the full weight of what Mom had just said settled over everyone. Aunt Linda's mouth had fallen open in shock, while the Hendersons sat rigid in their chairs, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. I stared at my mother, searching her face for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke, but her expression was resolute. She actually believed that giving away my birthday gift, a gift she'd spent weeks planning and personalizing for me, was the right thing to do because my brother deserved it more. The logic was so twisted, so fundamentally wrong, that I couldn't even begin to process it. "Are you serious right now?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The portfolio felt like it was burning in my hands, and I couldn't decide whether to clutch it closer or throw it across the room. The weight of everyone's eyes on me was suffocating, and I could feel my carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "This is my birthday party, Mom. This is my gift. You had my initials put on it." I held up the portfolio so she could see the gold lettering that spelled out my name, hoping the visual reminder would snap her back to reality. The evidence was right there in embossed gold. This gift was meant for me. "I know, honey, but you have to understand," Mom said, her tone taking on the patronizing quality I remembered from childhood arguments. "You already have a good job and a steady income. Marcus is trying to make it in the music industry, and opportunities like this don't come along every day." She gestured toward my brother, who still hadn't said a single word in his own defense. "One day you'll understand that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for family." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. I'd been making sacrifices for this family my entire life, and she was asking me to make another one on my own birthday. The phrase, "make sacrifices for family," echoed in my head like a broken record. When had Marcus ever made a sacrifice for me? When had he ever given up anything he wanted so that I could have something I needed? The answer was never, and we all knew it. I'd watched silently as Marcus got new guitars while I wore hand-me-down clothes. I'd bitten my tongue when he dropped out of college and Mom defended his need to find himself while criticizing my choice to work weekends to pay for my education. I'd smiled and nodded through years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like an afterthought in my own family. Sacrifices? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. What sacrifices has Marcus ever made? When has he ever given up anything for anyone else? The questions hung in the air like accusations, and I saw Marcus flinch. The truth was uncomfortable, and everyone in the room could feel it. Aunt Linda stood up from her chair, her protective instincts clearly kicking in, while the Hendersons looked like they wanted to disappear into the furniture. This birthday party was turning into a nightmare, and I was powerless to stop it. The perfect evening I'd been dreaming about was dissolving before my eyes. "That's not fair," Marcus said, finally finding his voice, though it lacked his usual confidence. "I've had to deal with a lot of pressure to succeed, and Mom's just trying to help me reach my potential." The words were so rehearsed, so clearly something he'd discussed with Mom beforehand, that I felt sick. They'd planned this together, had probably talked about it before the party, maybe even before I'd opened the gift. The realization that this humiliation was premeditated made it 10 times worse. They'd let me believe I was finally valued, then orchestrated this moment to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. "Your potential?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're 2 years old, Marcus. You've been chasing this dream for 8 years with nothing to show for it but a handful of gigs at coffee shops and dive bars." The words felt cruel as they left my mouth, but I was beyond caring about hurting his feelings. He was perfectly willing to take my birthday gift and somehow make himself the victim in the process. Meanwhile, I've built an actual career, earned promotions, and proven myself over and over again. But somehow you deserve my gift more than I do. The absurdity of it all was making me dizzy. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat awkwardly and announced that they should probably head home, clearly uncomfortable being witnesses to this family meltdown. "No, please don't go," I wanted to say, but the words stuck in my throat. I needed witnesses to this insanity, people who could confirm that I wasn't overreacting, that this was as wrong as it felt. But I understood their need to escape. Who wants to watch a family tear itself apart over birthday cake? As they gathered their things and made their hasty goodbyes, I felt my support system shrinking with each step toward the door. Soon, it would just be family, and I'd be outnumbered. Aunt Linda positioned herself firmly beside me on the couch, her presence like a shield against the madness that had taken over the evening. "Sarah, I think you need to seriously reconsider what you're doing here," she told my mother, her voice steady but stern. "This is going to damage your relationship with your daughter permanently if you don't fix it right now." I felt a surge of gratitude for her willingness to speak up, even as I realized how humiliating it was to need someone else to defend me to my own mother. The fact that an outsider could see how wrong this was made it even more painful that Mom couldn't. But Mom's jaw was set in that stubborn line I knew so well, the one that meant she'd made up her mind and nothing was going to change it. "I'm thinking about what's best for both of my children," she said, as if that explanation made any sense at all. "Sometimes being a mother means making difficult decisions." I stared at her, wondering when she'd ever made a difficult decision that didn't benefit Marcus, when she'd ever put my needs ahead of his wants. The answer was never, and we all knew it. This wasn't about being a good mother. This was about maintaining the family dynamic that had always favored her golden child. For the first time in my life, I felt something inside me snap. 28 years of being second best, of watching my achievements get overshadowed by Marcus's potential, of having my feelings dismissed and my needs minimized. it all came rushing to the surface in a wave of rage so pure it took my breath away. I stood up from the couch, still clutching the portfolio, and faced my mother with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The room seemed to tilt around me, and I felt like I was seeing everything through new eyes that were finally tired of accepting less than I deserved. This moment felt like a breaking point, and I knew there was no going back to the way things were. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Absolutely not. This is mine. You gave it to me, it has my name on it, and you are not giving it to Marcus." The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. I'd never directly challenged Mom like this before, never stood up for myself so boldly. But something about the sheer audacity of what she was asking had unlocked a part of me I didn't know existed. I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced, like I was finally taking up the space I deserved. The portfolio pressed against my chest felt like armor, protecting me from a lifetime of diminishment. Mom's eyes widened in surprise at my defiance. She was clearly used to me backing down, used to me swallowing my disappointment and going along with whatever she decided. "Don't be selfish," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "This could change Marcus's whole life. Your job is stable. You don't need this like he does." The familiar guilt trip made my stomach churn, but for once, I didn't let it work on me. I could see through the manipulation now, could recognize it for what it was. A tool she'd been using to control me for years. The clarity was both liberating and infuriating. "Selfish?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm selfish for wanting to keep my own birthday gift? The one you spent weeks planning specifically for me?" I looked around the room at the faces of our remaining guests, all of whom were watching this family drama unfold with obvious discomfort. "What's selfish is asking me to give up something that was meant to celebrate me so that your precious golden child can have another handout." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were true, and saying them out loud felt like breaking chains I'd worn for decades. I was done pretending this family dynamic was normal or acceptable. Aunt Linda finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," she said, addressing my mother directly. "It's the girl's birthday, for crying out loud. You can't just take back a gift because you've decided someone else deserves it more." Her support gave me strength, reminding me that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt and angry. This wasn't normal family behavior. This was wrong, and everyone in the room could see it except for the two people who mattered most to me. Having an ally made me feel less alone in this fight, less like I was tilting at windmills. The validation from Aunt Linda emboldened me further. "You know what the really sick part is?" I continued, my voice gaining momentum. "You let me believe for one perfect evening that I actually mattered to you. You let me think that you'd finally seen my worth, that you were proud of what I'd accomplished." Tears were starting to blur my vision, but I blinked them back angrily. "Do you have any idea how much it meant to me to hear you brag about my promotion to Mrs. Henderson? How good it felt to finally be the focus of your attention." The pain in my voice was raw and undeniable. "I do see your worth," Mom protested weakly, but the words rang hollow. "This isn't about that. This is about opportunity and timing." She was grasping for justifications that didn't exist, trying to rationalize behavior that was fundamentally irrational. "Marcus needs this chance more than you need a fancy portfolio." The dismissive way she said, "fancy portfolio," made my blood boil. She was minimizing her own gift, reducing something she'd claimed to put weeks of thought into to nothing more than an expensive accessory. If it was just a fancy portfolio, why did Marcus need it so desperately? "You're right," I said, my voice deadly calm now. "I don't need a fancy portfolio. What I needed was a mother who could celebrate my achievements without immediately thinking about how they could benefit her favorite child instead." The truth hung in the air between us like a weapon, sharp and undeniable. What I needed was to feel valued and important for once in my life. What I needed was to matter as much as Marcus does. My voice cracked on the last words, but I pressed on. But apparently that's too much to ask. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally seeming to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. "Look, if it's such a big deal, I don't need the portfolio," he said, but his tone suggested he was only saying it because the situation had become uncomfortable. "I can find something else to use for the meeting." The offer felt too little, too late, like putting a Band-Aid on a severed artery. This wasn't really about the portfolio anymore. It was about everything the portfolio represented. All the years of feeling invisible and unimportant in my own family. "No, Marcus," I said, turning to face him directly. "You don't get to be the gracious one now. You were perfectly willing to take my birthday gift 5 minutes ago. You sat there silent while Mom humiliated me in front of our guests." I felt tears threatening again, but I refused to let them fall. "Do you have any idea what it's like to always come second to you? To watch Mom light up when you walk into a room the way she's never lit up for me?" The questions were rhetorical. Of course he didn't know, because he'd never had to live in anyone's shadow. He'd always been the sun that everything else orbited around. The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Mom's face had gone pale, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with a defense that didn't exist. Marcus was staring at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap, possibly realizing for the first time how lopsided our mother's affection had always been. Aunt Linda nodded grimly, her expression saying, "About time," without her having to speak the words out loud. The truth was finally out there, hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, like I'd just run a marathon but could keep going for miles. "That's not true," Mom said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "I love you both equally. I've always tried to be fair." The words sounded rehearsed, like something she'd told herself so many times she almost believed it. But the evidence was overwhelming, decades of proof that contradicted her claim. "You're being dramatic and emotional. This is just about one gift, not our entire relationship." She was trying to minimize what was happening, to make me seem hysterical for pointing out patterns that had defined my entire childhood. The gaslighting was so familiar it made me sick. "One gift?" I repeated incredulously. "Mom, this is about 28 years of gifts. It's about birthday parties where Marcus got homemade cakes and I got store-bought. It's about you driving 3 hours to see his high school graduation, but missing my college graduation because you had a headache." The memories came flooding back, each one a small wound that had never properly healed. "It's about you keeping his artwork on the refrigerator until he was 16, but taking mine down when I was 8 because we needed the space." Each example felt like evidence in a court case I'd been building my entire life. Marcus looked up sharply at that last example, and I could see recognition dawning in his eyes. "I didn't know you felt that way about the refrigerator thing," he said quietly. "I thought you just weren't into art anymore." The admission was small, but it revealed how completely oblivious he'd been to the favoritism that had shaped our childhoods. "I never asked Mom to take your stuff down." It was true. He'd never explicitly asked for preferential treatment. He'd just accepted it as his due, never questioning why the rules seemed different for him than they were for me. "Of course you didn't ask," I said, not unkindly. "You never had to ask. Things just magically worked out in your favor, over and over again. The bigger bedroom when we were kids because you needed space for your instruments. The car when you turned 16 while I had to save up for my own. College tuition paid in full while I worked 3 jobs to cover my expenses." The list could go on for hours, each item a small betrayal that had accumulated into a mountain of resentment. "You got to be the dreamer, the artist, the one with potential. I got to be the responsible one, The one who didn't need help because I was so capable. Mom's composure was finally starting to crack. You were capable, she said defensively. You were always so independent, so self-sufficient. Marcus needed more guidance, more support. The justification was one I'd heard countless times over the years, and it had never made sense. I thought you preferred handling things on your own. The victim blaming was subtle but unmistakable. Somehow my independence was the reason I'd been neglected, not evidence of how I'd been forced to fend for myself from an early age. She was making my strength into a flaw that justified her neglect. Was independent because I had to be, I shot back. I was self-sufficient because no one was going to take care of me if I wasn't. Do you think I wouldn't have liked some support? Some encouragement? Some acknowledgement that I was struggling, too? My voice was rising again, and I didn't care. I learned early that complaining got me nowhere, that asking for help was useless, that the only way to survive in this family was to need nothing from anyone. The words were pouring out of me like water from a broken dam, years of suppressed feelings finally finding their voice. Aunt Linda reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me in the moment. She's right, Sarah, she said to my mother. I've watched this dynamic for years, and it's not healthy. This girl has been fighting for your attention her whole life, and you've been too focused on Marcus to notice. Her words carried weight because she was family, but not part of our daily dysfunction. She shouldn't have to be perfect to earn the same love you give him unconditionally. The validation from an outside observer felt like oxygen to my starved lungs. I do love her, Mom protested, tears starting to form in her eyes. Everything I've done has been out of love. Marcus just needed more help getting started in life. The tears felt manipulative, like she was trying to make herself the victim in this situation. I never meant to hurt anyone. The words might have been sincere, but they came 28 years too late. You're successful and strong. Isn't that what every mother wants for their child? She was trying to reframe her neglect as somehow beneficial, as if forcing me to be independent had been a gift rather than an abandonment. What every mother wants, I said through gritted teeth, is for their child to know they're loved unconditionally. Not to have to earn it, not to have to prove they deserve it, not to have to compete with their sibling for basic attention and affection. The portfolio was still clutched against my chest, a tangible reminder of how quickly her supposed love could be withdrawn. And they definitely don't want their mother to give away their birthday gifts because someone else deserves them more. The air quotes I made around her words dripped with sarcasm and hurt. Marcus finally spoke up again, his voice small and uncertain. I didn't know it was like this for you, he said, looking directly at me for the first time all evening. I mean, I knew Mom worried about me more, but I thought that was just because I was struggling. I didn't realize she was neglecting you. The word neglecting hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw Mom flinch. Maybe I should talk to the record producer about rescheduling. This doesn't feel right anymore. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged the imbalance in our family, and while it felt good to be heard, it also felt insufficient. Awareness without action was just empty sympathy. Looking around the room at the wreckage of what was supposed to be my perfect birthday celebration, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. The portfolio pressed against my chest had become more than just a gift. It was a symbol of everything wrong with my family dynamic, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me without a fight. You want to know what would be best for your children? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. Treating them equally, celebrating their achievements, not playing favorites like we're still 5 years old. The words felt like they were coming from somewhere deep inside me, a place that had been silent for too long. I don't play favorites, Mom protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally, seeming to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. I love you both the same. The lie was so blatant, so ridiculous in the face of 28 years of evidence to the contrary, that I actually laughed out loud. It was a bitter, painful sound that made everyone in the room flinch. "You're just making this about something it's not. This is about opportunity, not favoritism." She was still trying to justify the unjustifiable, still refusing to see what was right in front of her. "Really?" I challenged, standing up and pacing to the fireplace. "When was the last time you bragged about my promotion to your friends? When did you ever display one of my college achievements on the refrigerator? When have you ever planned a surprise party for me? Or driven 3 hours to see me receive an award? Or called me just to tell me you were proud of me?" Each question was like a dagger, cutting through years of pretense and denial. "You do all of those things for Marcus, but somehow you love us the same?" The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in the room could see it. Mom's face crumpled as the weight of my words hit her. I thought you didn't need that kind of validation," she said weakly. "You were always so confident, so sure of yourself." The excuse was pathetic, a flimsy attempt to justify decades of emotional neglect. Marcus was more sensitive, more vulnerable. I thought he needed more support. The victim blaming continued, as if my apparent strength somehow made me less deserving of maternal love and encouragement. "I never realized you felt this way." The blindness was either willful or pathological. How could she not have noticed? "Of course I needed validation," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I was your daughter. I needed to know that you were proud of me, that my achievements mattered to you, that I was more than just the reliable one who didn't cause problems." Tears were threatening again, but I refused to let them fall. "Do you know how many times I've watched you beam with pride when Marcus played a song, and wondered why you never looked at me that way when I got promoted or won an award?" The pain in my voice was raw and undeniable, years of suppressed hurt, finally finding expression. Aunt Linda stood up and moved to my side, her presence offering comfort and support. "This has gone on long enough, Sarah," she said to my mother, her voice firm. "You need to look at what you've done to this family, how your favoritism has damaged your relationship with your daughter." Her words carried the authority of someone who had watched our dysfunction from the outside for years. "This isn't about one gift or one opportunity. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been going on for decades." She was saying everything I'd wanted someone to say for years, validating my experience in a way that felt revolutionary. Marcus finally found his voice again, but his words surprised me. "Mom, maybe we should listen to what she's saying," he said quietly. "I mean, looking back, I can see how things might have seemed unfair." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the favoritism, but it was more than I'd ever gotten from him before. I never thought about how it affected her because I was always focused on my own struggles. The admission was small but significant. He was finally seeing beyond his own experience to recognize mine. Maybe the record producer meeting isn't as important as fixing this. The offer felt genuine, but also insufficient given the magnitude of what had been revealed. "It's too late for maybe," I said, my voice steady now. "This isn't something that can be fixed with a gesture or an apology. This is about 28 years of feeling like I didn't matter as much as my brother." I looked directly at my mother, wanting her to see the pain she'd caused. "This is about learning that love in this family is conditional, that it has to be earned, and that even when you earn it, it can be taken away and given to someone else at any moment." The portfolio felt like evidence of that last point. Even when she'd seemed to finally see my worth, it had been temporary. Mom was crying now, but I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. "I never meant for you to feel that way," she said through her tears. "I love you so much. You're my daughter." The words felt empty, too little too late. I can see now that I made mistakes, that I hurt you without meaning to. The apology was vague and incomplete, lacking any real acknowledgement of the specific ways she'd failed me. "Please don't let this ruin our relationship." The plea was selfish. She was more concerned about preserving what we had than addressing why it was broken in the first place. Our relationship was already ruined, Mom, I said sadly. I just stopped pretending it wasn't tonight. The truth was liberating and devastating at the same time. I can't keep hoping you'll change. Keep waiting for you to see me the way you see Marcus. I can't keep accepting scraps of attention and pretending they're enough. The portfolio pressed against my chest felt like armor now, protecting me from further disappointment. I need to focus on building relationships with people who value me for who I am, not who see me as an afterthought to their real favorite. The words were harsh but necessary. Looking around the room one last time, I realized that this moment would mark a turning point in my life. I could continue accepting the family dynamic that had diminished me for years, or I could choose to value myself enough to demand better. I think, I said, my voice deadly calm now, that I need some space to think about what kind of relationship I want to have with people who think so little of me. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. I was finally choosing myself over the desperate hope that my family would change. It was time to stop waiting for love that would never come and start building a life where I didn't have to beg for basic respect. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the portfolio sitting on my nightstand like a trophy I'd won in battle. The house was quiet now. Mom had gone to her room in tears. Marcus had disappeared to wherever he went when family drama became too much, and Aunt Linda had left after giving me the longest, most supportive hug of my life. The silence felt different than usual, charged with the electricity of change and the weight of words that could never be taken back. I touched the leather portfolio gently, marveling at how something so beautiful had become the catalyst for such an ugly truth. In a strange way, I was grateful for it. Without Mom's attempt to give it away, I might have continued pretending our family was normal for years to come. Aunt Linda had stayed for another hour after I'd gone upstairs, and I could hear her voice through the floor, calm but firm, as she continued the conversation I'd started. When she finally knocked on my door to say goodbye, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It was about time." Her words meant more to me than she could possibly know. A lifeline thrown to someone drowning, in decades of emotional neglect. "Your mother loves you, but she's been doing it wrong for a long time," she'd said. "Maybe this will wake her up, and if it doesn't, you'll be okay without her approval. You're stronger than you know." The validation felt like water to someone dying of thirst. The next morning, I woke up to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes and a cup of coffee gone cold. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the divide that had been created the night before. The kitchen felt different in the harsh morning light, less like the warm sanctuary it had seemed during birthday breakfast, and more like a battlefield where truths had been spoken that couldn't be unsaid. "I've been thinking all night," she said quietly. "About what you said." Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying, and I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness at the sight of her obvious distress. At least she was finally feeling some of the pain she'd caused me over the years. "And?" I asked, pouring myself coffee and sitting across from her at the table where we'd shared so many meals over the years. The morning light streaming through, the windows seemed harsher than usual, illuminating all the cracks in our relationship that we'd both pretended didn't exist. "Have you come to any conclusions?" I tried to keep my voice neutral, but I could feel the hurt and anger still simmering, just beneath the surface. The portfolio was upstairs in my room, safely away from her reach, but the memory of her trying to give it away still stung like a fresh wound. I wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine, just because she'd spent the night crying. "I think I owe you an apology," she said slowly, as if the words were difficult to form. "Not just for last night, but for a lot of things over the years." It wasn't a complete admission of guilt, but it was more than I'd ever gotten from her before. I never realized how it might have looked to you, how unfair I've been. The qualifier might have looked rankled. It hadn't just looked unfair, it had been unfair. But I recognized this was probably the closest thing to real accountability I was going to get. I thought I was helping both of you in different ways, but I can see now that I was wrong. The admission was halting and incomplete, but it was something. You were wrong, I agreed, not softening my words to make her feel better. You spent 28 years making me feel like I was less important than Marcus, like my achievements didn't matter, like I had to compete for basic parental affection. I took a sip of my coffee, surprised by how calm I felt. Last night wasn't an isolated incident, Mom. It was the culmination of decades of favoritism that you either couldn't or wouldn't see. The clarity was almost intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I was speaking my truth without worrying about her reaction. The portfolio was just the final straw, the one thing I couldn't pretend to accept gracefully. She needed to understand that this wasn't about one gift. It was about everything the gift represented. I know that now, she said, wiping at her eyes with a tissue that looked like it had been used extensively throughout the night. I've been calling your father, trying to understand how I let this happen. The mention of Dad surprised me. He was usually absent from these kinds of family discussions. He said he tried to talk to me about it over the years, but I didn't want to hear it. The admission that others had noticed and tried to intervene made it even worse somehow. I thought I knew what was best for both of you, but I was so focused on Marcus's struggles that I couldn't see I was creating different struggles for you. It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard her say. We sat in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. The kitchen that had felt so warm and promising yesterday morning now felt like neutral territory in a war zone. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally, her voice small and uncertain. I don't know how to undo 28 years of damage. The hopelessness in her voice might have moved me once, but I was past the point of managing her emotions. I want to try, though. I want to do better. The words were right, but I'd learned not to trust words without action. Can you tell me what you need from me? The question was a start, but it felt like asking someone to rebuild a house after burning it to the foundation. I need time, I said honestly. I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly trying to earn your approval. The words felt revolutionary as I spoke them. When was the last time I'd done something just for me, without considering how it would look to my family? I need to stop waiting for you to change and start building a life where your opinion of me isn't the most important thing in the world. The truth was both liberating and terrifying, and I need you to stop making excuses for Marcus and start holding him accountable for his choices. That last part wasn't negotiable. I was done watching him coast through life on charm and potential while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Mom nodded slowly, seeming to understand that this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a heartfelt conversation and a group hug. I'll respect your need for space, she said, and I'll work on myself. Maybe talk to someone about why I've been such a different mother to my children. The offer of therapy was unexpected but welcome. At least she was taking some responsibility for her role in our dysfunction. I love you, and I hope someday we can have the relationship you deserve. The words were nice, but I'd heard too many empty promises over the years to put much stock in them. Change would have to be demonstrated, not declared. 6 months have passed since that disastrous birthday party, and things between Mom and me are still complicated but slowly improving. We're in therapy together now, working through decades of dysfunction with a professional who doesn't let either of us off the hook. Marcus moved out finally, renting a small apartment across town with money he got from a part-time job at a music store. A job he found after his band broke up when the record deal fell through. The portfolio sits on my desk at work, a daily reminder that I'm worth celebrating. that my achievements matter, and that I have the right to expect the people who love me to treat me with respect. It's become more than just a professional accessory. It's a symbol of my self-worth, hard-won and fiercely protected. Some gifts, I've learned, are worth fighting for, especially when they represent something much bigger than the thing itself.